Hey everyone, welcome to a deep dive on something I know a lot of you are curious about, and that's intermittent fasting. We've got a ton of great sources to work with for this one. Studies, expert opinions, even some personal stories. Let's see if we can sort through it all and find out, does when you eat really matter as much as what you eat?
It's great to be here.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's so much hype around intermittent fasting. It's easy to get lost in all the noise. But having all these different sources means we can really dig in and find the facts.
For sure. And one of the things that caught my eye right away was this 2024 study from the Annals of Internal Medicine. They followed obese individuals, some eating within a 10-hour window, others within a 14-hour window. Get this, they found no real difference in weight loss between the groups, as long as they were eating the same number of calories.
It really makes you think twice about that idea that intermittent fasting just burns fat like magic, huh? It seems like the classic rule, calories in, calories out, still holds true.
So where does that leave us? Do we need to go back to counting every single calorie?
Not so fast. While this study shows that managing calories is important, there might be other benefits to intermittent fasting that go beyond weight loss. Let's look at what some of the other sources say.
Sounds good. I've got this source here, The Ultimate Guide to Mastering the Golden Rule of Fasting. And they talk about something called autophagy. It sounds kind of like a cleanse for your cells. Can you tell us more about what autophagy is and why it matters?
Definitely. Imagine your cells have these little recycling crews constantly cleaning up. That's basically autophagy. It's how your cells break down and reuse old or broken parts. It keeps everything running smoothly.
So, our bodies are already doing this naturally. How does fasting play into it?
Well, research suggests that fasting can actually give this cleaning process a boost. When you don't eat for a while, your cells kind of go into survival mode and get better at recycling and repairing themselves.
That's pretty amazing. What does all this cell recycling actually do for us?
There are studies suggesting that this increased autophagy could protect us against diseases that come with age, maybe even slow down aging itself. Think of it like giving your cells a chance to renew themselves.
Wow, that sounds promising. But is there enough evidence to support those claims, or is this all still pretty new?
It's definitely an exciting area of research, but you're right to be cautious. While early findings are promising, we need more long-term studies to really know how autophagy works and how fasting affects it.
That makes sense. So maybe weight loss isn't a guarantee, but there might be other health benefits. What else can we learn from these sources?
One interesting theme is that intermittent fasting might help with mental clarity and focus.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about that. The Ultimate Guide even talks about fasting increasing BDNF. Does that have something to do with it?
It does. BDNF stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It basically acts like a fertilizer for your brain cells, helping them grow, survive, and function better.
So, if fasting can increase BDNF, that could explain why people feel sharper and more focused when they fast. But is that a surefire way to boost brain power? Or is it just a temporary thing?
It's a good question. Some studies have shown that intermittent fasting can improve cognitive function, including memory and attention, but we need more research to understand the long-term effects.
So, maybe not a guaranteed brain power hack, but definitely worth looking into more. I'm seeing how there's much more to intermittent fasting than just weight loss.
Exactly. And this brings us to another important idea, balance. It's not only when you eat, but also about the types of food you eat during your eating windows.
Right. The Ultimate Guide actually calls this the golden rule of fasting. It's about finding a rhythm for your body, not about depriving yourself.
Exactly. And that's super important to remember, no matter what your goals are with intermittent fasting.
That makes me think about all the different ways people do intermittent fasting, 168, 5.2, alternate day fasting. It can feel a little overwhelming. Can you help break down those methods and tell us which ones might work best for different lifestyles?
You're right. It's like a whole menu of fasting options. Let's start with 168, which is fasting for 16 hours and eating within an 8-hour window. It's often a good place to start because it's fairly easy to fit into your day.
I've heard of that one. What about 5.2?
With 5.2, you eat normally for 5 days and then restrict calories to 500, 600 for 2 non-consecutive days. This could be good for folks who like a more flexible approach.
So on those 2 restricted days, do you eat just one meal or spread the calories out?
That's a good question. There are different ways to do 5.2. Some people prefer 2 smaller meals on fasting days, others like 1 bigger meal. It's about finding what works for you.
And then there's alternate day fasting, which sounds intense.
Yeah, just like the name says, you alternate between fasting and eating normally. It can be effective for weight loss and has some promising research behind it, but it's not for everyone.
So many choices. It seems like there's no one right way to do intermittent fasting.
Absolutely. The key is finding what suits your lifestyle, goals, and how your body responds.
Speaking of how our bodies respond, the sources have a lot of great tips for making intermittent fasting easier and more effective. Many of the Arabic sources, like Susususuasuasira, emphasize staying hydrated during the fasting window.
You're right. Hydration is so important, especially when you're fasting. It helps flush out toxins, keeps you feeling fuller, and can even prevent headaches and fatigue.
Makes sense. And what about what we eat when we break our fasts? Does that matter too?
Big time. Focusing on nutrient-dense foods during those eating windows can make a huge difference in how you feel and how your body responds to fasting. Think lean proteins, colorful vegetables, and healthy fats, things that keep you full and energized.
So it's not just when we eat, but also being mindful about what we eat.
Exactly. It's about giving your body the best fuel possible after that period of rest.
You also recommends avoiding sugary and processed foods. Those can cause energy crashes and make you crave more junk.
That makes sense. I've noticed that when I stick to whole, unprocessed foods, I feel much more satisfied and energized.
It's amazing how much those choices impact how we feel, right?
Totally. You know, something else that really caught my attention was the spiritual side of fasting that comes up in sources like Yusisig and Sing. Hisik sing kin, Bikat sik sing, Kitsigit sing, Isik sing chexi sing siko. Can you give us some background on how fasting has been used spiritually across cultures and religions?
Fasting has these deep spiritual roots that go way beyond physical health. In many traditions, it's about discipline, self-awareness, and connecting to something bigger than yourself.
It's interesting how fasting can connect the physical and the spiritual. It really is. By not eating, we create this space to examine our thoughts, emotions, and actions. We connect with this inner stillness and understand ourselves better.
This has been super thought-provoking. But before we get too caught up in all the potential good stuff, we should remember that intermittent fasting isn't always easy. Our sources mention challenges like social events, hunger pangs, and staying consistent while traveling. Any advice on overcoming those hurdles?
You're right, those are very real challenges. And there's no one solution. But remember, flexibility is key. If you're worried about a social event, maybe plan your fasting days around it, or try a more flexible method like 5.2, where you don't fast every day.
Good point. It's all about making intermittent fasting work within our own lives.
Absolutely. And remember to communicate. If you're going to an event with food, tell your host or friends about your fasting schedule. They'll probably be understanding and supportive.
That's true. Most people are happy to accommodate different diets when they know in advance. Who knows, maybe your commitment to intermittent fasting will inspire others to try it too.
That's always a possibility. It's amazing how our choices can influence those around us. Welcome back to our deep dive. We just scratched the surface in part 1, but now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty. How do we actually make this work? What are the strategies for success with intermittent fasting?
Yeah, because knowing the science is one thing, but putting it into practice, that's where it gets real. How do we make this sustainable, something we can actually stick with?
Exactly. And let's be honest, if it feels like a constant battle, we're not going to keep it up.
Yeah.
It's got to be enjoyable too, right?
Totally. So where do we start? What are some of the biggest challenges people face, and how can we tackle them?
Well, I think one of the most common concerns, and this is natural, is hunger. Those hunger pangs can be tough, especially when you're first starting out.
Oh, I can relate to that. Especially when you're used to eating throughout the day. It can feel like your stomach is staging a protest.
Right. But remember, hunger often comes in waves. It's usually not this constant gnawing feeling. It comes and goes. If you can just ride out those initial waves, it often subsides.
That's good to hear. But in those moments when your stomach is growling, what are some practical things you can do to manage that hunger?
Staying hydrated is huge. We touched on that earlier, but seriously, drinking water throughout your fasting window can really help curb those cravings. You could also try herbal teas, things like peppermint or ginger. They can be quite soothing.
Yeah, I've found that keeping busy is a good strategy too. Immersing myself in work, going for a walk, even just getting lost in a book, anything to shift my focus away from food.
Absolutely. That's a smart move. When you're engaged in something you enjoy, time seems to fly by, and the fasting window feels less daunting.
Speaking of enjoying things, let's talk about food. What do you eat during your eating windows? That seems pretty important.
Definitely. It's like, okay, you fasted, you're ready to eat, now what?
Hmm.
How do we make sure we're nourishing our bodies the right way?
You nailed it. Focus on nutrient-dense foods. Think whole foods that are packed with protein, healthy fats, and fiber. Those are the things that will keep you feeling full and satisfied, give you lasting energy, and support your overall health. So we're talking things like lean meats, fish, eggs, nuts, seeds, colorful veggies, all that good stuff.
You got it.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to have fun in the kitchen. Find some new recipes, experiment with different flavors. Eating should be a joyful experience, not a chore.
I love that. It's about finding that sweet spot between nourishment and pleasure. But what about social situations? You know, those dinners with friends, birthday parties, holidays. It seems tricky to navigate those while fasting.
You're right, social events can be a bit of a curveball. But again, flexibility is key. If you know you've got a social gathering coming up, you can adjust your fasting window that day. Maybe shorten it a bit, or maybe opt for a more flexible method like the 5.2 diet where you don't have to fast every single day.
Makes sense. So it's all about working with your life, not against it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to talk to people about it. Let your friends and family know about your fasting schedule. Most people are really understanding about these things when you explain it to them.
Yeah, most people are happy to accommodate different dietary needs when they know in advance. And hey, you might even inspire someone else to give intermittent fasting a try.
Absolutely. You never know who you might influence with your healthy choices. Now, let's shift gears for a moment. I want to talk about something that doesn't always get as much attention between the mental and emotional aspects of intermittent fasting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What do you mean by the mental and emotional side of things?
Well, when you think about it, intermittent fasting isn't just about food. It's also about self-discipline, about getting to know your body's signals, and about making conscious choices.
That's true. It definitely takes a certain level of mindfulness.
It does. And as with any practice that challenges our habits and pushes us outside our comfort zone, there can be a range of emotions that come up. You might feel frustrated sometimes, maybe doubtful, or even a little deprived.
That makes sense. It's all part of the process, right?
Exactly. It's a journey. And like any journey, there will be bumps in the road. The key is to be patient with yourself, acknowledge those feelings, and remember that it's all about progress, not perfection.
I love that. Progress over perfection. So, what are some ways we can navigate those emotional ups and downs and actually make intermittent fasting an enjoyable experience?
Well, one thing that can help is to focus on the positive. Remind yourself why you're doing this. What are your goals? What benefits are you hoping to achieve? And celebrate those small victories along the way. Maybe you hit a new fasting milestone, or you're feeling more energized, or you're noticing positive changes in your body. Take the time to acknowledge those wins and appreciate how far you've come.
That's a great reminder. It's easy to get caught up in what we haven't achieved yet and forget to appreciate the progress we've made.
Absolutely. And another thing that can make a big difference is creating a supportive environment for yourself. Surround yourself with people who understand your goals and who will cheer you on.
Yeah, having a support system is huge. It's much easier to stay motivated when you've got people in your corner.
For sure. And don't underestimate the power of community. There are so many online forums and groups dedicated to intermittent fasting. Connecting with other people who are on the same journey can be incredibly helpful. You can share tips, recipes, swap stories, and just encourage each other along the way.
I love that. It's like having a whole cheer squad for your health goals.
Exactly. And lastly, remember that intermittent fasting is not a quick fix. It's a lifestyle change. It takes time to adjust, and it requires a bit of patience and persistence. Don't get discouraged if you don't see results overnight. Just keep focusing on making small, sustainable changes and trust that your body will respond.
It's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Exactly. And speaking of marathons, let's address another concern that people often have. Energy levels. Many people worry that fasting will leave them feeling drained and sluggish.
Especially those of us who are used to having regular meals and snacks throughout the day. It can feel counterintuitive to think that not eating could actually boost your energy.
I get it. But here's the thing. Your body is incredibly adaptable. Once you switch into a fasting state, it starts tapping into alternative fuel sources. It starts using stored fat for energy.
So it's like we're training our bodies to become more efficient at using energy.
You got it. And while there might be a short adjustment period where you experience a slight dip in energy, many people actually report feeling more energized and focused once their bodies adapt to the fasting routine.
That's so interesting. It's like we're unlocking a hidden energy reserve within ourselves.
And that's one of the reasons why intermittent fasting has become so popular among athletes and people who are looking for ways to boost their mental clarity and focus.
So it's like a brain power booster, too.
Exactly. By reducing those blood sugar fluctuations and promoting the production of ketones, intermittent fasting can actually have a positive impact on cognitive function.
Wow, this is all starting to make sense, but I have to admit, I'm still a bit intimidated by the thought of extended fasting periods. What if I get a headache or feel lightheaded?
It's always smart to listen to your body. If you're experiencing any discomfort, don't hesitate to break your fast early or adjust your schedule. It's not about pushing yourself to the point of feeling unwell.
Good to know. So it's all about finding that sweet spot between challenging ourselves and respecting our limits.
Absolutely. And remember, there are different levels of fasting. You don't have to jump into a 24-hour fast right away. Start with shorter fasting windows, like 12 or 14 hours, and gradually increase the duration as your body gets used to it.
That's a helpful reminder. It's all about taking things one step at a time and finding what feels sustainable for you. And speaking of sustainability, I think that's a perfect segue into our next topic. How do we make intermittent fasting a long-term lifestyle change rather than just a temporary diet?
You hit the nail on the head. We don't want this to be a quick fix. We want to create healthy habits that we can stick with for the long haul. And I think the key to that is finding a fasting method that you genuinely enjoy and that fits seamlessly into your life.
So it's all about finding a rhythm that feels natural and sustainable.
Precisely. And we've already touched on a few strategies that can help with that. Finding a supportive community, setting realistic expectations, and celebrating those small victories. But there's one more thing I want to emphasize, and that's the importance of finding joy in the process.
I love that. How can we make intermittent fasting a joyful experience?
Well, I think it starts with reframing our perspective. Instead of seeing it as a restriction or a deprivation, try to see it as an opportunity to connect with your body in a deeper way. Pay attention to the subtle shifts in your energy levels. Notice how your senses become heightened, and savor the flavors of the foods you choose to eat during your eating windows.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the rules and the shoulds and forget to actually enjoy the experience.
Exactly. And when you start to find joy in the process, it becomes much easier to stick with it. And that's when the real magic happens, when you create a sustainable lifestyle that supports your overall health and well-being.
So it's not just about the physical changes, it's about cultivating a positive relationship with our bodies and with food.
Absolutely. And I think that ties in beautifully with the spiritual dimension of fasting that we discussed earlier. It's about using this practice as a tool for self-discovery, for connecting with something greater than ourselves, and for cultivating a deeper sense of gratitude and appreciation for the abundance in our lives.
I love that. And it makes me wonder, with all this talk about balance and sustainability, are there any specific tips or techniques from our sources that we haven't mentioned yet that can help us cultivate a more balanced and enjoyable approach to intermittent fasting?
One thing that comes up time and time again in both the scientific and the more spiritual sources is the power of mindfulness. The Ultimate Guide talks about really paying attention to your body's hunger signals, both the physical ones and the emotional ones. Ask yourself, am I truly hungry right now, or am I reaching for food out of boredom, stress, or habit?
It's so easy to fall into those patterns of mindless eating without even realizing it.
Absolutely. And this mindful awareness can extend beyond just our eating habits. SUBSCRIBE suggests using the fasting period as a time for introspection and reflection. Maybe try journaling, meditation, or simply spending time in nature to connect with your inner self.
I love those ideas. It's like using this time to not only cleanse our bodies, but also to clear our minds and nourish our spirits.
Precisely. And remember, balance also means being flexible and giving yourself grace. If you find yourself feeling overly restricted or deprived, it's okay to adjust your fasting schedule or even take a break.
It's not about punishing ourselves. It's about finding what truly supports our overall well-being.
Exactly. So tell me, what are some things you do to bring a sense of balance and enjoyment to your own intermittent fasting practice?
Well, for me, one thing that's been super helpful is scheduling my fasting windows around my natural energy levels. I tend to have more energy in the mornings, so I find it easier to fast in the evenings.
That's so smart. Working with your body's natural rhythms is key.
Totally. I also try to plan ahead and make sure I have plenty of healthy, delicious food on hand to break my fast. I don't want to end up feeling deprived or reaching for junk food out of desperation.
Preparation is everything. It can make all the difference.
It really does. And I also try to incorporate activities I enjoy into my fasting windows, things like going for a walk, listening to music, or catching up with a friend. it keeps my mind off food and makes the time go by faster.
I love that. It's about finding ways to make it an enriching experience rather than a restrictive one.
Absolutely. And it's amazing how when you shift your mindset, it can really transform your experience.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've explored practical strategies for making intermittent fasting easier and more enjoyable, delved into the mental and emotional aspects, and even touched upon the spiritual dimension.
Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll bring all of these threads together and leave you with some final thoughts and insights. And we're back, ready for the final stretch of our deep dive into intermittent fasting.
I am. It's amazing how much we've unpacked, from those weight loss myths to the science of autophagy and even the spiritual side of it all.
I know. When we started, I was mostly thinking about weight loss, but now it's like I'm seeing this whole other picture. What if it's not just about weight, but about feeling better overall, you know? Like maybe it can help with mental clarity or even help me connect with myself on a deeper level.
That's what I love about these deep dives. You go in thinking it's about one thing, and you come out with this whole new understanding. And the sources you brought, they show just how much potential there is with intermittent fasting.
Definitely. But we also have to remember that it's about balance, right? Finding what works for you, because it's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Absolutely. It's about listening to your body and figuring out a rhythm that feels good, something you can sustain.
Yeah.
And sometimes that takes a bit of trial and error.
One thing that really clicked for me was that idea of intermittent fasting not being about deprivation. It's more like giving your body a break, a chance to reset and rejuvenate.
I like that, hitting the reset button. It's not about punishing yourself. It's about supporting your body's natural processes so it can function better.
You know, that reminds me of something I went through a few years back. I was struggling with brain fog, like constantly hitting that afternoon slump. My energy was all over the place.
Oh, yeah. I think we've all been there. That mental fatigue can be so draining.
It was. I tried everything, more coffee, changing my sleep schedule. Nothing really helped. And then I came across intermittent fasting. Honestly, I was skeptical. Skipping breakfast to have more energy sounded crazy. But the research was interesting, so I thought, why not give it a shot? I started with 168, just to see.
What happened? Did you notice any changes?
I did. After a few weeks, the brain fog started to lift.
Oh.
Seriously, it was like night and day. My energy leveled out. I felt sharper, more focused, like someone had flipped a switch in my brain. I could concentrate better. I felt more creative. And those afternoon slumps, gone.
That's amazing. Sounds like intermittent fasting was working its magic on your brain. It probably helped regulate your blood sugar and boosted those ketones, giving your brain a more stable energy source.
That's what I figured too. My body finally had the chance to recalibrate and figure out a better way to produce energy. And the best part is, it wasn't just at work. I felt more present and engaged in my personal life too.
That's what we want, these positive ripple effects that reach all areas of our lives. It shows that intermittent fasting isn't just about the physical stuff. It can really improve our overall well-being.
I totally agree. And it reminds me that sometimes we need to trust our bodies and give them a chance to do their thing.
You know, it's also a great reminder that what works for one person won't necessarily work for another. Even within that 168 method that works for you, there's room for personalization. Remember, it's Yusutohor, aka Sutakoke. It talks about how the timing of your eating window should fit your lifestyle and preferences. Some people might do better with a later eating window. Others might prefer fasting in the morning.
That's a great point. And it brings us back to that idea of balance, which keeps popping up in all these sources. It's not just about when we eat, but also about what we eat, how we manage stress, how much sleep we get, the whole picture.
Exactly. It's about creating this holistic lifestyle that supports our health and well-being on every level. And that might involve incorporating things like exercise or mindfulness practices, or maybe spending time in nature or nurturing those close relationships. It's different for everyone.
And as we've seen, the spiritual side of fasting, like in and that can be a powerful part of this whole journey too. It can bring a sense of grounding and purpose and connect us to something bigger.
It's incredible how these ancient practices are now being backed by modern science.
It really shows how connected we are, our physical, mental, and spiritual selves. They all influence each other.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on. Taking care of ourselves means looking at the whole picture, not just one piece of the puzzle.
Well said. I hope this deep dive has sparked some curiosity and inspired you to explore intermittent fasting in a way that feels right for you. Maybe it's something you've been wanting to try, or maybe you're already doing it and you've learned something new. Whatever your journey is, remember to be kind to yourself, listen to your body, and find what feels good.
And remember, it's a journey, not a race. Be patient, be persistent, and most importantly, enjoy the ride.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into intermittent fasting. We'll see you next time.